Rudy Giuliani, coup mastermind John Eastman, Trump lawyer Jenna Ellis, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, and others. Literally a murderer's row. Giuliani pushed the coup hard in Georgia, testifying before state legislators 3 different times, making bogus allegations of fraud in each one.
Dominion and Smartmatic, the connection to Hugo Chavez, it's a highly inaccurate machine, but it does cast doubt on the entire legitimacy of the vote. What would that suggest? Phantom votes. That pattern has appeared in other states that were involved in massive fraud. There's overwhelming proof of fraud. Don't have to be a genius to figure out what happened. And I don't have to be a genius to figure out that those votes are not legitimate votes.
Those people look very unconvinced. The subpoena stating Giuliani, quote, possesses unique knowledge concerning communications between himself, former President Trump, the Trump campaign, and others involved in the multi-state coordinated scheme. And then there's John Eastman, the Trump attorney behind the baseless theory that Mike Pence could block the results on January 6th. Today's subpoena citing Eastman's advice to Georgia lawmakers that they had the, quote, duty to throw out electors. And here's why.
In the early decades of our nation's history, most state legislatures selected their state's presidential electors themselves. I don't think it's just your authority to do that, but quite frankly, I think you have a duty to do that, to protect the integrity of the election here in Georgia.
Yeah, in the early parts of the U.S. Constitution, I couldn't vote either. Lindsey Graham is in hot water for allegedly phoning Georgia Secretary of State and asking if he could toss out certain mail ballots, an incident that Trump echoed weeks later with his own famous call to the Georgia official telling him to, quote, find votes. Today marks the first time that Georgia grand jury subpoenas have hit high-level Trump insiders. But District Attorney Fani Willis has gotten more than 50 witnesses to willingly come forward. That includes my next guest. You can see her in this photo. She is the lawmaker seated to the left of the screen, talking to Giuliani during a break in one of those notorious hearings. Democratic State Senator Ginger Dunn has testified behind closed doors to the grand jury. She is my exclusive guest, live on The Beat, when we're back in just 60 seconds. Senator, thank you so much for joining us on The Beat tonight.
No, thank you.
Thank you. I have to start with this because I think this is the question that lots of regular people are thinking. What was it like having Rudy Giuliani, who you know is like the right-hand man of the former president, show up and say, hey, I've got this presentation for you? Like, when you first heard that he wanted to speak to several state legislators, did you think, okay, do they have some legitimate question? Were you concerned? Like, what was your first thought when you found out you were going to have a meeting with Giuliani, potentially to discuss the election?
Look, we had no idea. The Democratic state senators didn't. And I'll tell you that I really didn't know what was going on or who was going to be present until I walked into that Senate committee room. And I'll tell you, it was surreal. You know, you walk in and there's Rudy Giuliani, there's, you know, all the people you see or have seen on television. And even the OAN White House correspondent was there and Newsmax. I mean, all of these people. And it really felt like, what in the world is happening? But we had no clue that it was going to happen. It really did feel like a setup. So you show up. It's like a friend who says we're going to have lunch and it ends up being a crazy network marketing meeting, right? And you're like, okay, now we've got to sit through this whole thing. Once Giuliani went through his entire presentation, did it seem like he was just making it up all along? I mean, was the idea to convince you that some fraud had occurred, or do you think it was more the idea to intimidate you by suggesting, hey, look, we're going to push this, either go along with our crazy scheme or get bowled over? Look, I think what it was really about was providing what they believed to be some kind of legitimate basis for the legislature to go into special session and basically throw out, you know, the slate of electors that have been chosen by the voters of Georgia. You know, me and another state senator were sitting there. We had no clue who was going to show up, who was going to give testimony. I'm literally Googling who is John Eastman when he pops up. And I'm like, how are we going to cross-examine this guy?
Right.
And he purported to be giving expert testimony, on the Georgia Constitution and Georgia law. And the man isn't even a Georgia lawyer. So it was one of those things where I think what we see from the January 6th committee, we see kind of the overarching scheme. I think what we saw on the ground in Georgia in December was the actual implementation of it.
I want to play you, Senator Jordan, I want to play you some sound, because when you talk about what's happening on the ground, Georgia has sort of opened America's eyes to what the bullying and terrorism is like on the ground. I want to play this sound from the January 6th committee hearings and get your thoughts on the other side.
There is nowhere I feel safe. Nowhere. Do you know how it feels to have the President of the United States to target you?
I just don't do nothing anymore. I don't want to go anywhere. I second guess everything that I do. It's affecting my life in a major way, in every way, all because of lies.
Senator, you're running for Attorney General in the state of Georgia. You're down there on the ground. Have you also experienced this kind of violence and intimidation? I mean, look, you're just testifying locally, but it doesn't take much for the right-wing blogosphere to find names and put addresses out there. Have you felt threatened since coming forward to fight against this attempted coup on the part of the former president?
Yeah, almost immediately, even during the Senate committee meeting, almost as it's being live streamed, right? So Trump's telling all of his Twitter followers to tune in to the live stream. And so as they're watching, when I'm asking questions and pushing back, or when another state senator is asking questions and pushing back, we immediately start getting threats. It was one of those situations where I think that was intended to intimidate us more, to try to keep us from actually opposing this whole sham idea that they were putting out there. And look, it is scary. And part of the reason that those poor women have suffered the way they have is because of that hearing, because of that video that really was edited in a very creative way to make it seem like election workers in Fulton County were doing something wrong, when at the end of the day, all they were doing was their jobs.
You have an election this fall. You're part of a slate. You've got Bee Nguyen, who's running for Secretary of State. You've got Stacey Abrams. You've got Raphael Warnock. It's a strong slate of Democrats running in Georgia this year. If you become Attorney General, and let's say there is a Republican Secretary of State, how do you think these kinds of conflicts could end up playing out in 2024? Do you think you could end up at loggerheads if there's an election denier Republican who ends up being a Secretary of State in 2024?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, the way I look at the Attorney General's office is that I'm supposed to be the attorney for the people of the state of Georgia. And if there is anyone that is trying to overturn a lawful election and not count the lawful votes of the people in this state, then absolutely, I view the role of the AG as kind of standing in the gap when nobody else will. And part of, hopefully, we'll elect Democrats up and down the ballot, but I will say that even if it's just me, I think that the AG has an incredibly important role to make sure that people follow the law, and that our democracy actually can withstand some of the attacks that we've been going through.
Georgia voters, just put the whole slate in, and then everybody can actually work together to count your votes in 2024. State Senator Jen Jordan, thank you so very much, and good luck in your race.